Kelson. He said that it might be a good idea if we started with just getting some questions from everybody here or topics they want to hear more about, and use that to integrate it along with some of the things I want to bring up. So,
Topics in general? Topics in general about cigars.
Well, not topics. Well, there's some limitations.
Cookies?
But somewhat related to the
Coffee
theme of your
or tea?
day. Like
Did Rav
either,
Shigar like scones?
right, what you've heard from Rav Eitan, or thinking about, I think particularly one of the things that would be fruitful for us to talk about that we really touched on, and I think it's a very rich topic, is the difference between U.S. and modern Orthodoxy, and particularly modern, and Dati Leumi community, and the various challenges, and whether Rav Shigar's writing is really much more specific to those kinds of challenges versus some of the challenges here. Challenges both positive and negative. I don't want to put a value judgment on that. So that's certainly one of the things I'm interested in, but that would be an example. Yeah, go ahead.
There's I guess it's not a big question, I'll just say it. So, obviously it seems like Rav Shigar is like a towering figure in terms of thought, and hopefully he's having a lot of influence. It seems like you're still in the stage of processing and editing and gathering together a lot of his thought and his written materials and his lectures, and still in the stage of publishing and disseminating all that stuff. And it makes me think of someone like Rav Solochower, where you can have this sort of cult of personality that develops around him, such that even though he's not been alive for a very long time, even now they're still sort of in the process of locating every tiny little last fragment of something he would have written, and also they're trying to figure out, oh, he's not alive, but maybe, what would he have said on this, what would he say on this, and we're still trying to apply his shitot, so to speak, to a contemporary reality. So I wonder, if you're thinking about that, and specifically, if you're thinking about, how are you looking to evolve the Torah of Rav Shigar? Where are you looking to take it next? In terms of only being, once you get past the stage of, processing all of his material, instead of just, we're always looking at what he would have said, how do you sort of take that forward?
These are big questions.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I was going to, let me just take a few.
Okay.
That was a great start. Okay.
This is just a more general question. I'm curious how you're, to hear more about why you think Rav Shigar has spoken so, spoken so much to the heart of the Israeli Jew. Why is he so popular? Why do you think his thought has caught on in the way it has? And why now?
I could contextualize the question, which is, to what extent is it so popular? Or is it marvelous? I know there are regarding some things out there, some you wouldn't know, listen to me have debates, and but is it really a small phenomenon that you're hoping to grow, or is it a growing phenomenon on its own?
Good start.
Okay, I think that's a good start.
I guess I just have one more, which is, I don't know, a general question about the relationship between, let's say, Talmidim in the Yeshiva, or also Balabatim in the world spend in terms of reading hyper-modern philosophy versus reading Sugiyot in the Talmud or Halacha L'Maaseh. So, how does this genre of philosophy or literature can see itself as existing within the canon of Jewish thought? Is it something that's especially for rabbis to know? Is it something for everybody to know? The Rambam thought that reading his material would take the place of everything else. What's that?
Not right. Yeah.
Okay, so they're related. I hope if I forgot something, remind me. First, I don't think he's very, very popular. Sometimes it's more like a geographical thing. If you are around the Gush Etzion, Yerushalayim, people know him. If you go a bit further, Tel Aviv, my parents live in Haifa, I don't think anybody in their shul. Maybe now they heard his name, but tried once or twice to teach stuff there. It was difficult. So again, different. It's a geographical. It's also biographical. Younger people know more than older people. When I came to Yeshivat Siach, about maybe 15 years now, it was nobody almost heard of it because there were only 2 books and they were not popular. Today, people that come to Yeshivat Siach, usually they already read most of the books. So they know all this, they think they know something. But you go to other places, you go to more other yeshivot, other types of yeshivot. If they know they should object it, but they don't really learn it. But it's not that there's a big dispute or something. What was with Rav Lichtenstein is very old and was very specific in Talmudic methodology. So I couldn't even say that he is a provocative figure that everybody are debating about him now. But there are Yeshivat Siach. When I came to it, was much more marginal because if you weren't there, most chances that you haven't heard of him at all. Today we have yeshivot that are much bigger from Yeshivat Siach, which are very influenced from Rav Shagar, Otniel, for example, also Midrashot for Nishim, which Rav Shagar, and you have Rav Shagar books. I think Migdal Oz is a bit related, and Devorah also. It's not that they are exactly on the line. Otniel is more, it's more obvious because of Benny Kamlanzon, the Rosh Yeshiva there was a student of Rav Shagar. There are other students of Rav Shagar in institutions that they bring something. It's related to the other questions. They are not Shagarists. They're not, and I think nobody is trying to ask what would Rav Shagar say. It's something about his Torah that doesn't allow it. He didn't raise this kind of students, I think, and I don't think his books will create this kind of effect that people will always ask. There was an Itvadut in a Yeshiva once where he spoke about, it was Yad Kislev, so he spoke about the concept of the tzaddik, and somebody asked him, will Yeshivat Siach be a Chassidut once? Will you still be here when it will be? And he said something that he said a lot of times, that he doesn't want to grow Hasidim, he wants to grow Rebbes, because he thinks everybody should be his own tzaddik. There were students who tried to treat him as a Rebbe, asking for advices. Usually he would push them away. Sometimes he would instruct them, but he was very careful about it because he thought this is not what we need today. Also, the publication of his books, I don't know if we're still in the phase of processing, because although this is my work and I am trying to, and I think it's important, in a way I think we are beyond the main influence is the book that were already published. There are a lot of interesting things. There are things that I wish we could have published faster because they may have, but sometimes I think maybe we lost the momentum because the books that came out in the last 10 years, they are the image of Rav Shagar, which is now in a sense actual and effective. The books that we are working on will be published in the next years. I think the interest will be maybe lower, but I'm counting on the after effects, the people that read it, and this is what they read in Shirwalef and the Yeshiva, so something will happen as a result of that. I don't think it will be like, no chance that it will be like Rav Soloveitchik, because it's not a figure that people are building their religious world on it, but it's something that goes into the Machzor Adam, into the blood knife, and it affects them, and people are, this kind of thinking affects people in places that you wouldn't imagine, so different things will happen. It won't be maybe what Rav Shagar meant. When I came here last year, somebody told me that there are people here in America that are teaching Rav Shagar, because they never met him, maybe they've never been in Israel. They're translating the text by themselves. Nobody has control about where things are going. So I'm here to collect reflection, to see what's going on. Related to the question about what Rav Shagar can say to the American situation.
I mean, I would just add that I think Rav Soloveitchik had the same kind of philosophy. Rav Soloveitchik did not want Hasidim. Rav Soloveitchik, when a student came and said, what should I do, psakim, he would say, well, what do you think? And yet, he is the defining figure of modern Orthodoxy. I wonder if some of this is like sort of being more on the edge versus being the center, like what that might be about. I mean, I guess the equivalent would be Harav Kook, right, which would be much more, I think, the equivalent for Rav Soloveitchik. So, and I wonder also if there might be a difference between sort of espousing a more modernist philosophy versus a postmodern, like how much certainty are you conveying, which I think Rav Soloveitchik conveyed a lot of sense of certainty. But that might be a difference. Do you want to address Rabbi Reznikov's question, which I think had more to do about like the canon of what you're studying in yeshiva and what you're studying outside of the yeshiva, like
people,
yeah.
What did Jews read?
Yeah.
I think different books, different Rav Shagal books relate to different people, because the first book that were published was mainly the sermons for Chagim. This is something I think also Balabatim, in some kind of Balabatim can read it, and it's actually something that they give meaning to mitzvot and Chagim and situations like that. I think today he is most known for this postmodern philosophy, but if you look at his books, this is just a small part of it. Maybe it's the most innovative when you're looking for philosophy, but these introductions, what his main was trying to do was to give meaning to a religious way of life. When the first book of his postmodern philosophy was published, it was called Kelim Shvurim. It was later edited to what's called Chot Shvrei L'chot. I was in the yeshiva at that time, and I was shocked because I never heard him speak about these things. He never talked about postmodernism, never talked about Tzionut Datit and its problems, all these kinds of discussions, sociological and political. He was teaching at Admor Zaken, teaching Rabbi Nachman, teaching Gemara mostly, most of the times teaching Gemara. But after I read later on, when I dove more deeply to these ideas, I understand that the way he was teaching Rabbi Nachman at Admor Zaken, without naming any philosopher at all, he was all inside in the books of Roshot. You see it also. This is the way where it communicates with people who are not in the theoretical level, not interested in this level.
So I was going to save halacha for the end, but I can't help myself. So I was struck when I had read the source sheets before, and I think even more so when you were speaking, that it's something that I think I struggle with a lot, which is the combination of a more radical theology philosophy and then a much more conservative approach to halacha. And you spoke of, it seems that he very much believed that was the case and that was necessary. That if I'm getting this right,
What do you mean that was necessary?
meaning that in relation to halacha, the absolute appears as there's a resistance to change and to changing too quickly, and the danger of the dangers of that. So when I hear that, that frustrates me because I feel like sort of, as we say, that's where the pedal meets the metal. That's kind of, if you want to talk about what, I don't know how you
The rubber meets the road.
Rubber meets the road, whatever.
Okay, I think I get the
that's the Lamaisa. In other words, if you talk in our community, but not only in our community, what are the struggles that people are having in terms of where they find themselves outside and trying to believe and, trying to push themselves to believe, or where even there's an inherent conflict. Like I could be a very religious person, I could care very deeply, but it so happens that part of my values as a religious person, is not necessarily according with my halachic practice, and there's almost no way to resolve that, right? So some of the things that you haven't spoken about in terms of attitudes towards equality for women, I'll take as just a question I'm particularly interested in. So is that where like the ad kan, in which case like that's very nice that I have a philosophy, but it's not. There's no way that it could translate meaningfully into my life. I'm going to still be bumping up the same kinds of things.
So this is a major question, and
I hope
sure
so.
I don't have answers for everything. I think I don't read this statement of Rav Shagar about halacha as like an ideological statement of how halacha should be. I think what he's doing is like a phenomenological analysis of this phenomenon. This is how halacha works, and tries to understand what it does, how it shapes my life. And it's not saying I think, as a statement that you should be radical in the theological context and conservative in your halachic observance. He said this is how Orthodoxy observes halacha. And what I think is trying to point is what this kind of observance does and what other kind of observance. In this article he also speaks about conservative and reform halacha. It does something different, and this is something I think very, very liberating in this kind of conversation, because usually when we go to these places it becomes very ideological. It should be like that or like this. And I also don't think that he's creating a balance between his radical thought and his... Maybe psychologically you could say that this is something that was... if I'm looking about his Torah, I don't think that it's a balance. I think these two things are related, and I can try to say that he's strictly... maybe this kind of description of halacha is based on this kind of radical philosophy, because if I think what I try to describe in my shiur is maybe the existential thought of Rav Shagar, because thinking about things from the existential point of view, and this is one thing I like about these discussions about halacha, that they are not based on metaphysical assumptions on how halacha should like. They're based on the existential value, on the existential effect of halacha. So, and it means that why he's not saying that because Torah min Hashamayim it can never change.
Right.
He said it might change. Sometimes he said that this is halacha as it is now. Maybe in next generation it will be different. So of course this has a price for me, for others. This is a price that we pay, but he wouldn't say, I don't think he says that we have to pay this price to preserve Torah min Hashamayim. We can choose to pay this price because it shapes our life differently. Because I know that there are halachot that if I will give up on them, I might do that, and it will be easier in some ways. I'm losing something, I'm losing something and gaining something. When I see this kind of description, I feel it's very liberating, because there is kind of tension in these discussions, very idealistic from one side or on the other side. I think what he does is just putting it as different options. You might change the halacha to make it more egalitarian. You will lose something. I'll use an example that I like to use. It's in one of his books also. Rav Shagar told about the shiur that he had in the Yeshivat many years ago before I came there. They were teaching Kiddushin, I think. We spoke about this minhag, what was beginning in that time, in Rabbanit and the Tilumi community started doing this, that after the ceremony is over, the kala can give a ring to the chatan. But you have to announce that the ceremony is over. So this kind of thing, what Rav Shagar tells is that at first he objected this, because he said this is like a formalism. You're treating halacha as something that you have to get rid of, and then you do the ceremony that you like. This was an initial, and he even said that the religious Zionist ideology is to try to connect halacha with life, and not doing things that should have said Devorah, to understand the meaning of things. And if the halachic ceremony is not egalitarian, you have to accept it. You can't just do it to Devorah and then do what you want. His students objected, and he was convinced. So he told the story a few times in all kind of context, because he said this uncoherent ceremony, which has two parts that don't coexist and they don't create a whole picture, this is the sincere reflection of our situation. Because our commitment to halacha, some people's commitment to halacha, is not just something formal commitment that you do for your parents. It is part of your life. So you have another point of view which is more egalitarian, maybe. And he even says that maybe we do in some place identify even with the patriarchal part of halacha. But even if we don't, even we don't have nothing to do with this patriarchal worldview, I think most of us have an identification with this concept of halacha as something that doesn't change easily, the way he described it here. So this is part of me, this is part of me. These two parts don't coincide. There is, if I take one of the poles, I can make the total egalitarian ceremony, I'm losing something that halacha does to my life. Although that's what he spoke here, that because it is not relevant, because it changes slowly, because it has its inner language. If I go to the outside and I do only the halachic ceremony, I'm losing another part which I think Rav Shagar sees as part of his religious life.
Okay.
Because this egalitarian thing is also part of his religious values.
Right. So I guess part of what I wanted to hear is exactly that notion about sort of either the meaning, like I guess I would say the meaningfulness of having that kind of conflict, of having to live as a modern person. In other words, if you really want to live, not just forget the secular world, as a modern person who can't help but being outside their head all the time, you know, like part of that, right, isn't that has to be part of what becomes religiously meaningful. Because, you know, I don't think people want to, if you're a religious person, if you're a halachic person, you don't want to choose. You're not, but what you're grappling with all the time, right, is that conflict between the various values that you have, all of which you would like to see as religious values, and I think that can be true, but it, you know, it's like, which foot am I standing on today, you know, and you know, I guess just seeing, I'd like to hear sort of an articulation of kind of the difficulty of that kind of life. Is there a value to that, and the fact that there's a frustration and a dissatisfaction that's inherently built in.
I don't think there's a value for the difficulty. I don't see Abshadar as someone who puts difficulty as a value.
Okay.
And different form of salvation in this context.
Right.
This is the situation. It's like the question of Lechatchila and Diavad that you mentioned. If this is the situation, usually the Lechatchila and Diavad is always a tricky question. I think about it a lot because I'm very connected to Rabbi Tzadok Cohen Lublin. I think it's always dealing with the Diavad and in a way trying to say that this is the Lechatchila where it speaks about Galut, Esther Panim. He's always taking the Diavad and showing the gain in this situation. So for me, I don't think I would like to educate my children in a way that doesn't have this complexity, but it's a complexity that it has a price. I think the value is not the difficulty, but the sincerity. I'm not sure if it's the right word. You have to be honest, okay, with your situation. And a lot of times, our religious life creates dishonesty. This is one of the Rav Shagar main criticism about religious ideology or the Rav Kook students, the way they create some harmonious picture which is not related to people's experience. They create this kind of dishonesty and denial of contradictions. But also, I don't see it as something that you have to accept this price. There's one of what we are editing in the books are mainly computer files which he wrote when he was preparing his shiur. And there's one discussion that haven't been published yet when he speaks about feminism. And usually when rabbis, at least in Israel, speak about feminism, they prefer to speak about essential differences between the genders, because this gives them ground to say that halacha shouldn't change. And here Rav Shagar, he takes more like a postmodern and non-essentialist approach. We think that things can change. Maybe probably things will be different in another generation. But the question he asked, what will be the effect of the changes if you do it today? What can you change today without losing something that maybe you want to keep? But he says, he has one sentence there, probably won't be published ever, when he says that there is a price that maybe we should pay, that in this generation there are things that we couldn't change without harming something that is important for us. But I don't see it as an imperative suck. It's a choice. If you change, if you won't listen, there are things, despite what I said earlier, many of Rav Shagar students are not strictly observant in heroes. It's a choice you have. Sometimes in these cases when you don't observe the halacha strictly because it opposes other values you have. So it's a choice. Maybe the women in our generation won't agree with Rav Shagar and they do want to change, or the women definitely, specifically. Maybe we could decide to change the halacha in different ways than what he described here. But we can't ignore the prices that will be.
Right.
Right.
I don't know that I'm asking about the change. I'm asking because that's a complicated issue, and like I said, I think many people come down very mixed. It's really about sort of, to me, when you're talking about trying to speak in a language that's relevant, then how do you, there is an existential angst that I feel like needs to be addressed, because it seems to me very difficult to avoid that as a modern person who's trying to live a balance of values which sometimes come into conflict. So I think that's more where I'm not sure if it's that it's an optimism that he has, or if there's, a derech to bedavka kind of try to get around that. But it seems to me if you're trying to talk about meaning and relevance, I'm not sure how you avoid dealing with the fact that it's very difficult to be an authentically modern religious person and not inherently have angst and conflict and stuff like that.
I think the way you experience these conflicts, it's mostly, or at least very much affected by how you understand these conflicts. If I'm feeling all the time that I'm living a life which is b'diavad, because my parents educated me, because I grew up in a secular world, then maybe I would prefer to have a much more harmonious and monolithic lifestyle, then maybe my angst will be much more disturbing. If I'm also willing to see what I'm gaining in this situation, what I think sees that these kind of contradictions, they are productive, they're creative.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't make it, I don't think it's optimistic. It's hard to say about Rav Shigar that he is optimistic. But I think he doesn't sound, he's not turning this into an ideal situation. This is, I think mainly all these kind of questions are very related to a specific situation. He describes how the people around him experience these kind of contradictions. Maybe for other people, even the halachic psak will be in a way different, because the effect of halacha will be different for them. Like you said, that in the next generation, maybe halacha would change without losing this kind of starkness that he described. And probably for people who live in a different cultural context, the picture will be different. So for the people, I think that Rav Shigar is thinking about the people who are connecting to what he says. This is my experience, that it's very liberating in the way that it gives place to your experience and it gives its meaning, so you also experience it differently.
I have one question about halacha, what we've been talking about again about machshava. From the halacha, and really more about the shmiras halacha, not interpretation or progression of halacha. I'm sort of thinking about issues that came up with Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim, and how for the people that were already engaged in sort of the philosophical endeavor, this was very helpful because it sort of solved problems, grappled with problems, and so on. And whereas other, of the leading Rabbanim of the time, I mean, it led to the burning of Rambam's book, felt that this complicates things and undermines the faith for people, for whom these weren't issues. And I wonder, if it's your sense that, that maybe the impact of Rav Shigar's, maybe don't people who find Rav Shigar's philosophy are those who are already looking for it. But I do wonder if you feel like for some people it was like, I was struggling with, a classic emunah, but at least I had a classic emunah, even though I was struggling with it, and that kept me on the straight and narrow. Now that I'm told that it's all like a construct and a this or whatever it is, and so that gives me more license to not feel as mukhliyav. So I wonder, some people it might help, and other people, is it possible that it sort of opens a door that isn't helpful? And maybe it doesn't. I'm not saying that's, that might just be a cost that's necessary. But so that's one thing I'm wondering about that. And the other thing about the machshava area, maybe it's somewhat similar. I don't know if you followed. There was a fascinating exchange of essays on Lehrhaus, which is sort of like an academic, about does Rav Shigar's philosophy help the types of value conflicts that modern Orthodox high school students are feeling? Forget halacha. What does it mean to me in terms of my liberal Western values? And Torah says certain things about women and other things about, about gays and other things about non-Jews and, and a molech and whatever the issues might be, right? And that creates just a distancing from feeling you can identify with the religious teachings. So, one person wrote, well, Rav Shigar will help here, because Rav Shigar speaks about it all being, from this postmodern lens, and it doesn't have a fixed meaning and a fixed set of values and so on and so forth. And the other educator wrote back and said, that doesn't help at all. Who wants to believe in a system that doesn't have a fixed set of values? And that's not going to help us with the sort of getting our students feeling that the Torah is something they can believe in. So I guess there's similar questions, but one's about halakha and one's about emunah.
Yeah, for the fifth question, it's hard to tell. I guess that there are people which will not, it will affect them, maybe it won't be good for them. I can't publish book for the whole way. once you write something in a book, and even when you speak to people, so we're pretty thin outside. I do see a lot of time that people who understand Hashgadah is because it touches them, because it's for them. And other people, or they don't understand, or they feel that there's something there that they don't want to deal with, so they put it aside. I'm not trying to say that it's good for everybody, not even everybody is a modern Orthodox or religious Zionist. There are different people. And people who, maybe it's the fact that it's not very excessive, it's also kind of a test that you have to go through. Accessible, yeah. There was someone, the story that somebody who published a book about Limud Mara, foreign Rav Kook. He had a chapter about Rav Shagar Limud Mara. And he says that he was in, there was a big event, I think it was the event before Rav Shagar died, there was a big in Yerushalayim for his refuato. And he says, I met there one Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Esther, and he told me, I don't understand, hundreds of people, of young people are coming here and reading Rav Shagar's book, and I try to read them and I don't understand the word. And I'm also teaching Rav Tzadok, I'm also teaching Maharal, so what's going on here? Sometimes the people who are related understand and they know what to do with it. But I'm definitely not saying that it's good for everyone. And maybe there are people that it won't be good for them. Now, for the other question, I think what people sometimes miss is that this postmodern attitude is not only towards halacha, saying that this is only a concept and maybe you could be, it's maybe before that, maybe for us it's the more difficult phase, it's also for the liberal values themselves. Because if I see a Gilitarian maybe as something which is totally mukhlat, absolutely nobody can touch it, this is the objective truth, and halacha is something that I'm asking myself, what do I think about it? And I'm in a problem, Shagar won't help me here. I think he's speaking to someone that knows to look from outside also on his liberal values. So the question, this is where this postmodern attitudes lead me to the existential discussion, because these are not objective truth and tradition, but two parts of my existence, and I have to find a way to live with both of them. Sometimes, like the example of the egalitarian wedding, it will be on the modern part will pay the price, not only halacha. And I feel it's important because sometimes people use this kind of attitude only to get rid of what they don't like in halacha, but they're not willing to look from outside on their modern beliefs.
Thank you, that was very clarifying. And anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, just apropos Rabbi Lindsay's question, so do you think that it's something that really, Lindsay was making the point that, it doesn't help with making people feel, it doesn't help cause people to feel hitchayvut to halacha necessarily. So the question is whether it's more for people who want to identify themselves with halacha and with being a dati Jew, but who need to find their own way within it without throwing away the foundations that they identify with. You say that's like an ideal.
To which kind of people? Why do you mean this description? And not people who.
I'm saying people that identify with wanting to be as a sympathy chayvut, but also wants to bridge that with the reality in which they live, today's values.
Yeah, I think this is the audience that I'll fix about. Sometimes you see people who are not observing at all related to halacha, and this is their way to become. But usually, I think this kind of existential speaking, it speaks to people that this is their situation, and sometimes people ask me if this kind of Torah can be used to להחזיר אנשים בתשובה. It's difficult because you don't have this big statement you can say you should be like me or anything like that. But sometimes people just get fucked because they hear this, it makes sense to them. It's something. I give them a description of a lifestyle, or not in the sense of, in the lower sense. I give them a description of a way of living, and they say, "Well, this is I want to have this." Sometimes people come from different places and they. But mainly it's speaking to people that are under the effect of halacha in one way or another, and they're trying to make sense of their situation.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to Hasidut and the language of Hasidut. So I always find it sort of, haven't put my head around people who kind of use the language of Chassidut and the text of Chassidut, but they're not Chassidim, right? Like, they don't buy into the whole picture, right? No,
Yeah.
not just sociologically speaking, but like, on some level, you're sort of picking certain things out, but, you know, you haven't bought into the whole package. And when Rabbi Kelson referred to it, I wrote to you about neo-Hasidism, so you have a phenomenon here, you know, where people sort of take, whether it's nigunim, whether it's like certain ideas in Hasidut that are about the Ava as opposed to the Yira, definitely, and they don't live an observant life, right? In other words, but, and maybe this is, I'm not necessarily being critical about it, but, you know, finding that as a way to Yiddishkeit. It doesn't sound to me like this is the same thing, but I'm wondering if you could clarify, like, where Rav Shagar's use of Chassidut sort of fits in.
I think generally it's not taking these kind of figures. I think about Martin Buber and that they're using Chassidut. They're talking, I think, to people which are not related to Halakha at all. And maybe they're not related to Judaism at all in any way. So they have this part of Chassidut, when they're taking off the halachic part and all other parts of Chassidut that they don't like, they're presenting them. If they're saying this is Judaism, this is Chassidut, it may be not maybe dishonest in a way. It's not a true interpretation of the situation. If they're saying this is the only thing that a person like you can accept from Judaism, so at least you have that. Rav Shagara, his situation that he's talking about, they are much more widely connected to all parts of Judaism. So what he takes from Chassidut, I think, is different from what these people do. And I think because he sees himself as something that is speaking from inside, so he doesn't have to be Chassid or not Chassid. It's like it's a text. Mainly for Shagara, it's a text. And usually he speaks about the parts of Chassidut that wrote text, wrote deep and big essays and short like Chabad and Reb Nachman and Reb Tzadok. It's not the Chassidut who are more on the emotional level. It could be speaking about the emotional level, but not Nigunim as the only thing, as a replacement for Torah. What he takes from Chassidut, I think, is like this basic assumption, like the essential tendency that I spoke about, and the ability to create new interpretations of mitzvot, of Torah. And specifically, I think his attitude is different from what Meo Chassidut maybe tried, because I think Meo Chassidut was usually trying to take Ahava instead of Yirah, or feelings instead of Halakha, because they wanted to take these things apart. I think what he's trying to do is usually to take this Ahava or emotional discourse and to use it in the halachic context. To speak what it means to describe what it means to observe halakha when what you're looking for is an experience. For example, when you're thinking about it, it's essential to it, not as an alternative.
So why Chassidut as opposed to Musar? In other words, or does he use all of them? I mean, in other words, what's appealing to him in Chassidut?
He used Musar. He personally was very connected to Musar, and he was teaching it, but not a lot. I think much less than Chassidut. I think what he felt that in our situation, I don't know exactly to answer it according to what I understand from his writings, but maybe I'm mixing here my feelings about Musar and Chassidut. When I studied Musar, even when I'm reading Rav Shagar, what he says about his doing with writings of Musar, or when I'm reading the books of Mount Musar, original books, I feel that there's something, they're always assuming some basic assumptions that are not spoken about. In Chassidut, the kind of Chassidut that Rav Shagar taught, the kind of Chassidut which I choose to learn mostly, they're giving maybe a more deep analysis about all the basic assumptions of what it means to believe, what kind of experience it is. But Musar, I always feeling that he's, what I'm trying to say, I think Rav Shagar felt that Chassidut was a language which speaks more to people in our times, and because it speaks about meaning. Because I think when you're not speaking about turning things meaningful, many times you assume that people should accept it without any This is what I meant when what I feel about Musar. Is they're already assuming that there are things you already believe in. Now they're trying to explain how to make it more meaningful in your life. Like there's the halacha you definitely believe that you should observe everything. I'll show you how to make it more interesting. Sometimes part of Hasidut are also like that. I think what Rav Shagat taught from Hasidut is those who deal with the basic assumptions. I'm not sure if that's clear enough. That's what I think.
Okay.
Thank you so much.